They slapped the cuffs on him like he was a common criminal until a four-star general stormed through the door, stared them down, and said two words that changed everything. Stand down. It was the kind of evening that made ghosts restless, clouds heavy with unspoken threats, the air thick with rain not yet fallen. Chief Petty Officer Alex Mason stood at the counter of the Mariner's Rest, a weathered little diner tucked away in the industrial guts of Norfolk's Naval District. The coffee in his hand was too bitter, the chair too hard, but for a man like him, it was the closest thing to peace he'd had in months. He wasn't in uniform, just khaki pants, a faded navy sweatshirt, and a cap pulled low. Still, he carried the unmistakable presence of someone who'd been trained not just to fight, but to survive. People noticed, even when they didn't want to. He had served 17 years in the Navy, 10 of those in elite sniper units. There were medals in a drawer somewhere, commendations, citations, a few folded flags he wished he'd never received. Mason didn't talk about the things he'd done, not because he was ashamed, but because most people wouldn't understand, and the ones who would were already dead or scattered across the world on silent missions. His eyes, a sharp, pale blue, scanned the street like he'd never left the war. Because in a way, he hadn't. Some wars followed you home. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped outside, coffee in one hand, his other resting instinctively near his side. The streets were mostly empty. The sky cracked with distant thunder, and he felt the air tighten, just enough to make his neck stiffen. That's when the black SUVs came. 3 of them. No markings, no hesitation. They moved in with the precision of wolves closing in on a wounded target. Tires screeched against the wet pavement. Doors flew open, and men in tactical gear poured out like a flood. "Down on your knees! Hands up!" The shout hit him like a shot. Civilians scattered. Chairs clattered inside the diner as people ducked. Mason froze. His mind shifted instantly into combat analysis mode. 6 operators, full gear, suppressed carbines, no visible IDs, private contractors or deep agency work. Definitely not local law enforcement. That ruled out a mistake. This was intentional. He moved slow, deliberate, letting the coffee fall to the ground. It exploded on the pavement, sending hot liquid spiraling out like shrapnel. He didn't resist. His hands went behind his head, fingers interlocked, as he dropped to his knees with mechanical calm. He felt the first pair of hands seize his arms. The plastic zip ties were cinched so tight they cut into the muscle. His face slammed into the hood of the SUV, hard enough to make his vision blur. The pain didn't faze him. What caught his attention was the silence. No rights read, no one saying why, no warning. Just force. The lead agent, mid-40s, stocky, probably former military, muttered something into his earpiece as Mason was shoved into the back seat. No words exchanged, no eye contact. The doors slammed shut. The inside smelled like gun oil and recycled air. As they pulled away, Mason caught a glimpse of the diner in the rearview mirror. Customers pressed against the glass, watching him vanish. A soldier carried off in chains by his own. The ride was long, too long. They took back roads, avoiding main streets and surveillance cameras. That confirmed it. This wasn't standard procedure. This was a ghost op. Mason didn't ask questions. He wouldn't have been answered. He focused on his breathing, keeping his pulse low, but his mind was racing through every mission he'd ever taken part in. There were things he'd done that weren't even known by his commanding officers, but who would have access to those records? And why now? Eventually, they arrived at a facility tucked behind industrial fencing and camouflaged by fake construction signs. No insignia, no flags, just a steel gate and silence. The doors opened. Mason was dragged out like dead weight and marched into the belly of the structure. The halls were concrete, lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Cameras tracked their every move. 2 more checkpoints, 3 locked doors. Then finally, they threw him into a small room with a steel chair bolted to the floor. No table, no mirror, no camera visible. But he knew it was there. The agents left. The door slammed shut. The silence returned, heavier than before. He sat there, hands still bound, sweat forming along his brow despite the chill. His wrists burned where the plastic had cut skin. The blood dried slowly. Hours passed, or minutes. Time dissolved in that place. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't a trial. This was an erasure. And then the lock clicked. The door creaked open, and everything shifted. A man entered, a figure who moved like command incarnate. The storm that followed him wasn't in his footsteps, but in his presence. General Marcus Holloway, the kind of man whose reputation spoke in rooms long before he arrived. Four-star general, war strategist, decorated leader, and from the look in his eyes, furious. Two officers flanked him, standing straight as rail posts, eyes wide with barely disguised fear. The agents outside the door shifted uncomfortably. Holloway didn't acknowledge them. His focus was locked entirely on the man still cuffed to the chair. Without a word, he crossed the room, pulled a folding blade from the inside of his jacket, and knelt. In one swift motion, he sliced through the zip ties. The cuffs clattered to the floor. Holloway stood slowly and looked Mason dead in the eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then came the words, "I'm sorry, Chief. This should never have happened." Mason stood, his joints stiff, the blood finally returning to his hands. "Then why did it?" The general took a breath. "Because someone inside the system doesn't want you walking free, and they've just made a serious mistake." Mason rubbed his wrists, still tingling from the blood rush. The marks left by the zip ties were deep, angry red lines that would scar for a while, but nothing compared to the wounds already buried beneath his skin. His eyes remained on General Holloway, trying to read between the words he hadn't said yet. The general motioned to the guards at the door. "Clear the hallway, no ears." The agents hesitated only a second before obeying. The door closed again, and for a brief moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the overhead lights. Mason didn't sit. Holloway didn't ask him to. Soldiers knew. Some conversations weren't meant to be heard from a chair. "You were taken under false orders," Holloway began, his tone low and deliberate. A classified operation flag was pulled from a defunct mission file, black ink level clearance. On paper, it looks legitimate, but the directive was planted. "Planted?" Mason echoed, not surprised, just angry. "Someone inside the system is pulling strings. Not just anyone. Someone with access to compartmentalized mission data. Yours specifically. They reactivated a file that doesn't even exist anymore. Operation Sentinel Shade." Mason's blood turned colder than the room. Sentinel Shade. That mission was sealed, locked, and buried so deep that even his after-action report had been scrubbed. It wasn't supposed to exist. They had been a five-man ghost unit. No insignia, no backups, deep in foreign territory during a covert extraction gone wrong. And what they uncovered wasn't just an enemy safe house. It was a covert weapons lab, funded not by foreign governments, but by a rogue alliance of private interests embedded within the U.S. military-industrial machine. The fallout from that mission had been catastrophic. 3 of the 5 men were killed. The 4th, Ramirez, was reported missing and presumed dead. Only Mason made it out, and barely. He'd sworn to silence, signed the death papers, closed the file, or so he thought. "Who pulled it?" Mason asked, voice steady. Holloway shook his head slowly. "We don't know yet, but I've already begun burning the trail. Whoever it is, they wanted to bury you before you spoke a word. You were supposed to vanish without a ripple. But the moment I saw that directive cross my desk, I knew something was off. I requested the footage, the authorizations, the chain of command approvals. Everything was forged." "They nearly pulled it off," Mason said. "Nearly," Holloway replied. "But I've seen too many good men eaten alive by this system. I'm not letting it happen again." There was a pause. Mason studied the general carefully. Holloway wasn't just doing this out of duty. His eyes had that weight, the kind of guilt you only carried when you'd already lost men to a broken machine. Holloway finally pulled a folder from inside his coat and handed it to Mason. "Read this." Inside were surveillance photos, declassified intercepts, a few grainy shots that made Mason's breath catch. One was a man, blurred but familiar. It was Ramirez, alive, much older, and not on U.S. soil. "This was taken 6 weeks ago. Morocco," Holloway said. "Facial rec is 99% certain. He survived." Mason shook his head slowly, trying to process it. Ramirez had been presumed dead in the blast. They never recovered his body. Mason remembered seeing him fall, half of his side torn open, dragging a detonator to cover their escape. There was no way he could have survived that. But there he was. "I thought I left him behind," Mason said quietly. "You did," Holloway said. "And somehow, someone picked him up. We believe he's working under coercion, or something worse. The man who captured that photo is now dead, poisoned before he could file a full report. Whatever's happening out there, it ties back to Sentinel Shade. And to whoever's trying to disappear me," Mason muttered. "Exactly." Holloway's voice dropped even lower. "I need you to come back in. But this time, no uniform, no official ops. This is off-grid, black cell. You'll have no backup, no clearance. If you're caught, we'll deny everything." Mason's laugh was short and bitter. "So same as always." The general didn't smile. "Worse. This time you're chasing a ghost who knows everything you do, and maybe more." For a long moment, Mason said nothing. His pulse had steadied, his hands unclenched. The years he had spent trying to fade into the background, after everything, were collapsing under the weight of one single truth. They weren't done with him, and he wasn't done with them. He reached down, lifted the folder, and stared at the photo of Ramirez again. Then he nodded once. "When do I leave?" Holloway exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath for a year. "Tonight. A contact will meet you at the civilian airstrip off base. Codename Atlas. He'll get you to Tangier." Mason tucked the folder under his arm. His voice was calm, resolute. "Then we end this. And if I find the bastard who forged that order—" "You bring him in if you can," Holloway said. Then after a beat, more honestly, "But if you can't, I won't ask questions." They shook hands. Not like officer to soldier, but like war-born men who had seen the worst in the world and still chose to stand. Holloway turned and opened the door. Mason paused in the threshold. "What do I tell the next guy they try to vanish?" Holloway looked back, his eyes full of something between rage and sorrow. "Tell him to scream louder than they can bury." The wind off the Strait of Gibraltar howled like a dying beast as the small prop plane dipped below the cloud line, skimming across the Moroccan coast. Tangier shimmered in the distance. Bright lights tangled in old alleys, modern towers side by side with broken mosques. Mason stared out the window, silent. Beneath his seat, a small duffel held everything he needed. A burner phone, one sidearm, two clips, a forged passport, and a compact encrypted transmitter that only one man in the world could receive. The general had kept his promise. No red tape, no leash. As the wheels screeched on the tarmac of the secluded airfield outside the city, Mason felt the familiar sensation return, the cold coil of anticipation, like a steel snake around his spine. This wasn't the Navy now. There was no mission clock, no base, no extraction plan. This was solo. A figure stood waiting beside a rusted Jeep, mid-30s, tall Middle Eastern features hidden behind mirrored aviators and a well-worn scarf. As Mason stepped off the plane, the man extended his hand. "Name's Atlas. Not my real one, but it'll do. You're late." Mason shook the hand. "Wasn't in a rush." "You should be." The drive into the city was wordless. Atlas wasn't one for small talk. He handed Mason a dossier on the move, several grainy photos, dates, times, and surveillance notes. Ramirez had been spotted 3 days earlier exiting a warehouse in the Casbah district. No armed guards, no high-tech vehicles. But his movement was orchestrated, timed, protected by an invisible net of informants and watchers. Someone was hiding him, someone powerful. As they approached the edge of the city, Atlas finally spoke again. "We think Ramirez isn't just alive. We think he's leading something." Mason frowned. "He's a sniper, not a strategist. People change when they're abandoned, or resurrected." They ditched the Jeep and moved on foot through winding alleys, slipping between rusting market stalls and echoing tunnels carved into centuries-old stone. Tangier was a maze of secrets, and tonight Mason was just another shadow among thousands. The warehouse stood like a giant fossil, half of its roof gone, metal siding flaking into the sea air. But Atlas stopped him 2 blocks away and pointed to a cafe across the street. He eats there, every night, same table, 2 guards, dressed like locals but built like Marines. Mason studied the pattern for an hour, sitting at a vendor's stall, sipping bitter mint tea. He saw the shift, how 2 men entered 5 minutes before Ramirez, did a sweep, took positions at the back. Then Ramirez walked in. The same gait, the same squared shoulders. It was him. The sight cracked something in Mason he hadn't felt since that last op. The sight of a dead man walking. "Is it him?" Atlas asked. "Yes." "Do we engage?" Number Y need to look him in the eyes first. Atlas didn't like that. He might not talk. He will. Mason waited until the next night. He shaved, changed clothes, and slipped into the cafe during the lull between prayer calls. A light crowd moved in and out. The 2 guards were there, same table, same rhythm. But they didn't notice him. Not at first, not until he was standing 5 feet from Ramirez, staring. Ramirez looked up from his plate and froze. It was like watching 2 mirrors collide. For a moment, neither of them moved. The guards rose, but Mason lifted his hand, slowly, open-palmed. "Easy," he said, eyes locked on the ghost of his former teammate. "Not here." Ramirez waved them down. "It's all right," he said, voice gravel. "He's not here to kill me." They sat. No one spoke for a full minute, just the clink of cutlery and the boiling tension in the air. Finally, Ramirez leaned back and exhaled. "So, they finally sent you." "No one sent me. They tried to bury me too." A bitter laugh. "Of course they did. You were dead." "I should be. Then how are you here?" Ramirez didn't answer. Instead, he lifted the edge of his shirt, revealing a long, brutal scar across his ribs. "That blast didn't kill me. A man found me, said he could save me. In return, I'd work for him, or he'd kill my sister in El Paso." Mason's jaw clenched. "Who?" "He called himself Bishop. He's not CIA, not foreign, he's worse. He's the broker of the black market within the black budget. He recruits ghosts like us, those declared dead, dishonorably discharged or framed. He uses what we know." Mason felt the blood drain from his face. "You told him about Sentinel Shade." "No," Ramirez snapped. "I never gave him that. But he knew. He had the files, the footage, the names. He said he bought it off someone inside the Pentagon. They want to restart the lab, build weapons that aren't just nuclear or chemical, cognitive, neural disruption, dark tech." Mason leaned in. "Where is Bishop now?" "He's in Algiers, moving base. If we don't move fast, we lose the trail. And if we lose him, we never get him back." Ramirez nodded. "You're coming with me." "You trust me?" "No," Mason said. "But I remember who you were. That's enough." They stood. The guards looked uncertain. Mason turned to Ramirez. "You help me stop this. You don't just earn your name back. You burn the whole system down." Ramirez stared at him, then nodded. "I'm tired of hiding. Let's bring the jackal into the light." The journey to Algiers was as quiet as it was dangerous. No passports, no flights, just boats, back road trucks, and silent promises exchanged under low lights. Mason and Ramirez moved like ghosts, carried by the currents of an underground world neither had fully escaped. Their destination, a mountainside compound in the outskirts of Algiers, where Bishop was said to be preparing for a transfer of data, blueprints, test subjects, and research that should never have existed. For days, they watched from abandoned rooftops and half-finished buildings, tracking convoys, drone flights, and guards who never showed faces. Bishop was careful, paranoid. He moved through his own facility like a man haunted by shadows. And for good reason, he had turned too many men like Mason and Ramirez into weapons. "Once we go in," Mason said, checking his gear in the shadows of their lookout, "there's no walking away clean." Ramirez tightened his vest. "I haven't been clean since the day they left me to die. Let's finish this." They struck at midnight. The compound's outer defenses were lighter than expected. Bishop didn't fear outside threats, only betrayal from within. But that made it easier to get inside. 1 silenced guard. 2, a stolen key card. They slipped through like smoke. Room by room, hallway by hallway, Mason felt the pressure in his chest build. Every inch closer meant stepping deeper into the belly of the beast that had nearly swallowed him whole. They reached the data vault, an underground room reinforced with titanium doors, where Bishop stored the real weapons. Information. Inside, a single terminal glowed in the dark. Ramirez worked the keyboard, breathing heavy. Encrypted. Level 7 military grade. I can get in, but it'll take time. Mason covered the door, scanning the corridor. He could hear voices now. Guards shifting, footsteps echoing, boots clicking like metronomes of fate. Hurry! I am. The screen blinked once. Then a cascade of files opened. Project names, locations, code names, even faces. Some Mason recognized, others that made his stomach twist. These weren't just operations, they were crimes. Black sites where neuroimplants had been tested on civilians. Remote villages wiped out in the name of containment. Soldiers turned into drones. It was all real. Copy it, Mason said. Ramirez inserted a drive and hit the key. That's when the alarm started. Time's up, Ramirez muttered. They ran. By the time they reached the courtyard, the guards were armed and ready. Mason didn't hesitate. 2 shots, center mass, down the first wave. Ramirez flanked, taking out the lights. Chaos, screams, flashbangs. And then a voice cut through the noise. Stop! Mason froze. Standing in the center of the compound, surrounded by 4 mercenaries, was Bishop. Tall, sharp suit, no armor, just arrogance and cold certainty. He looked directly at Mason. I was wondering when you'd come. You forged the directive, Mason said. You tried to vanish me. I did vanish you. You just didn't stay gone. Mason raised his weapon. That was your mistake. Bishop smiled thinly. You think this changes anything? Kill me, and another takes my place. This isn't one man's corruption. It's the world's demand. Ramirez stepped beside Mason, leveling his rifle. Then we'll start with you. Bishop raised a small device, a trigger. 1 step closer, and I wipe every file you just took. I hold the failsafe. Ramirez's hand twitched. Mason spoke calmly. You said the world demands this, but I've seen what happens when good men stay silent, when war becomes industry, when honor is sold off in pieces. Bishop shrugged. That's reality. No, Mason said. That's your reality. We're done living in it. Then he shot. 1 bullet. Clean. Bishop collapsed before he could press the trigger. The guards scattered, half too shocked to fight, the others dropping their weapons as Mason advanced. Ramirez grabbed the failsafe from Bishop's hand and crushed it under his boot. Sirens echoed in the distance. Local authorities, or maybe not. It didn't matter now. They torched the compound. Every file, every laboratory, every trace of the machine that had built monsters. Gone in a blaze so bright it lit up the Algerian hills. They watched it burn from miles away, sitting atop a ridgeline, smoke curling into the stars. Think it'll be enough? Ramirez asked. Mason didn't answer right away. He stared at the fire, remembering the faces of those lost. His team, his silence, his guilt. It's a start. They released the files the next morning. The world exploded. Journalists across continents broke the story. Whistleblower networks flooded with corroborating evidence. High-ranking officials were indicted. The Pentagon denied everything. But the receipts were public. And when Mason finally stepped forward, unmasked, testifying before a civilian tribunal in D.C., he did it with 1 sentence that echoed like a war drum. I was loyal. They were not. The hearings took months. Holloway retired quietly. Ramirez vanished again, but not into hiding. He started something underground, a network for soldiers like them, a way out, a way back. As for Mason, he never returned to the Navy, but he never left the fight. He became something else, a signal in the dark, a name whispered in rooms where justice was failing. They tried to bury him, but they forgot. Some roots grow deepest underground. They tried to silence the truth. Now it's our turn to speak louder. Subscribe to Our Hue, Our Voice, and never let power rewrite the story.